Yay, Media Group.
A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter and they really help us. I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. In this week's episode, part 2, Catherine walks us through the art of crafting a story. These are some of the things we don't have to memorize it. It doesn't have to be overcomplicated, but these are things to think about, to even be aware of, and just kind of tuck them away. And next time we're sharing that experience, we're sharing that story that we really want to have that impact. These are elements that can really help us bring out the best. And if you haven't listened to part 1 of this episode already, I highly recommend go back, listen to last week's episode first. It just really helps to put everything in context, really helps you to get to know Catherine, get a feel for her style, her ease with which she helps tell a story, helps to guide us in telling our own story. So with that, here we go. Part 2 of The Power of Narratives, Cultivating Our Wellness Through Storytelling.
So one way, if you're trying to think of a story you might want to tell, is to think about what are the stories where, as a result of that, I saw life a little bit differently. Not that you want it all wrapped up in a bow or like an after school special, but that's what, like, if you're trying to think of a story, thinking about like moments of change. I will also say to people, like, what are the stories that when you have a new friend that you can't wait to tell them? So we all have them, even like my dad, who totally does not consider himself a storyteller. They're the ones where, oh, Daddy, tell about that time when you were in the Air Force and blah, 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 blah. And he'll tell it, So, but then once you know what story you're telling, especially if you're going to tell it like in front of somebody or tell it like on stage or in front of a group, one thing is to think about your beginning, like where are you going to start? And even though in general, the stories I work with are usually not memorized, memorizing your first line, if you're actually going to tell it someplace in public, helps. Because, of course, you're going to be a little bit nervous, and just knowing exactly where you're going to start. On the flip side, also memorize your last line, like know exactly where you're going to end. Because I've seen some of like the greatest raconteurs in New York City history be on stage, tell a beautiful story, and then be like, well, I guess that's my story, and just wander off stage.
It's the hardest part. Yeah.
Yeah. And you want to like land that ending like a gymnast, like snaps, mobile, boom, your story's over. So those are two things to think about. Another thing to think about is putting scenes in your story. Some people talk in real generalizations, but if you can take us like into the restaurant with you, and one way to think about that is like see it like think of your life as like a movie and tell us what you're seeing. Describe the movie, like take us in. A thing that I've been playing with recently is like the 5 senses. It's like, what did you see? Is there a smell? Do you taste something? Like what, what did it feel like? It's just a way to ground you in the scene and help you remember. Now, you don't want everything to be in scene because it goes back to that having too many details, but picking 2 or 3 scenes that were the most important and bringing us into the room with you can be incredibly compelling. The third is emotion. A lot of people are so worried about emotion. Like they're afraid they're going to cry when they're telling their story. They're afraid that they're going to get upset or like somehow that showing emotion on stage is a weakness. But actually being willing to show emotion on stage is a superpower. If you're willing to be vulnerable, if you're willing to show your heart, that is what is going to connect you to your audience. Not that you should do that like in a manipulative way, but if it happens, don't worry about it. We have just seen this again and again. It's like our missteps are like talking about things that maybe could be a little bit upsetting. These are the things that actually connect us to each other. And if you get up and tear up a little bit, trust me, the audience will just be all the more on your side.
What if it's a cry that you can't pull back in? Like sometimes there's a catch in your throat. And I think when that happens to me, like when I hear someone telling a story and that happens, you feel it through your whole body. You get chills in your whole body because you know that you're hearing such emotion from that person. But there's times when you just can't rein it in.
I think that if you just can't rein it in, and you'll usually know that before you're on stage. Now, you might not know it if you're just saying it to yourself in the mirror, but if you try to tell it to another person, usually that will bring out the emotion. This is part of what the Moth has rehearsals with the shows where all the tellers tell the stories to each other. And if they're going to get a little emotional, it will happen in rehearsal. And it might not have happened up until then. And you can fake your own rehearsal by just telling it to a couple of friends.
Right.
But if you get so emotional that you can't get back into the story, that is honestly probably a sign that you're not quite ready to tell it yet. And sometimes it just takes a little time to be ready to tell it. And if something is like, it's one thing to be emotional, but it's another thing to be like really raw. And if you're that raw, it probably means that you still have some processing to do. And just for your own sake and for the sake of the audience, then maybe if there's a way to do it. I mean, this is why it's so tough telling the story at a funeral,
Right.
because there's been no time to process.
That's what I was thinking. You know, I talked about my mom earlier, and I did her eulogy, and she had so many, you know, just quirky things about her life and about, you know, I wanted to layer storytelling into her eulogy, and I also wanted to layer humor into it.
Yeah.
And I was also terrified that I was going to start sobbing and not be able to rein it in. And so I think you would be proud of me in the storytelling space because all the things that the Moth guides us to do, practice it, I practiced it. I had my notes. I practiced it out loud. The night before her funeral, my husband and my best friend Amy and I were walking in the neighborhood, in my parents' neighborhood, and we just were walking in blocks and blocks. It's a small neighborhood, circles and circles and circles. And I had the paper in my hand, but I'm saying the eulogy and saying it. And there were certain spots every time that my voice would catch, like we're talking about. But with them, I got past where I was losing it. And then when I got to the humor part, I could actually feel myself laughing. But for the actual service, I asked my husband to stand up there with me because he also had the notes. And of course, he'd heard me say it now 50 times. And it was that safety net that I needed in case I did have just that ugly cry, I can't control it, and you're heaving, then he could take it on.
I think that was a genius solution. And honestly, this happens. I've been to funerals where someone starts giving a eulogy and they break down and they can't finish.
They can't. Yeah, that was my fear. And I didn't. And
I'm proud of you. That's amazing.
And then it was really
so smart
to see people's tears. And then those tears became just crying with laughter in there. And it was so beautiful at a funeral to see so much laughter, and then people still share those elements of the story with me now. And so it was one of the rawest, it was probably the rawest talk I've ever given, but the fear of emotion. And so I guess in that kind of a situation, you don't really have an option with a eulogy. You're either going to do it or you're not. But when it's something else by choice, I think about I am on the board of our American Heart Association here. And every time there's different galas or fundraising events, a survivor is standing up sharing their story, or the family of someone who's lost someone to heart disease. And I think in those types, that's the type of a situation where you have that option. You can choose to share it now, or you can choose to share it in a few years when you can keep it together more.
I think that's right. Or like if you're giving a keynote and you have a story in the keynote, just anything where if it's your choice, you might just want to give it a little bit more space.
Yeah.
But here's like an advanced tip is if you are telling a story where you think there might be some emotion, but you're also going to want to be funny in it, put a joke early, like just somewhere in there, because that indicates to the crowd that it's okay to laugh with you. Because then sometimes if you've just been so serious,
right,
and then you try to bring it back, people don't laugh as hard as they would because they think it might be disrespectful or stepping. So if you're going to, the harder the story you're going to tell, again, if there is any humor in it, and there isn't always, but if there is, see if there's a way to just work a little joke in at the top, because what you're telling the crowd is that you are in command of the material and that it's okay to laugh with you as well as cry.
And then it's also not such a surprise for them of where you're taking them.
Exactly. Like one of a storyteller I worked with in my last 2 years at the Moth was Francine Wheeler, who tragically her son was murdered at Sandy Hook. But Francine is actually one of the funniest people I've ever met. Like so funny. And later in her story, there are really funny moments. And so we knew that we had to do two things. We had to get some sort of humor in there, and we needed to get it out of the way right away, rip the band-aid off that her son had died so that everybody wasn't waiting for it. And that they knew that as soon as she got to funny parts, that it was okay to laugh with her. And actually, we were both amazed at how much laugh she got. Like people really, I think it was also a relief from the emotion. But it was really, it's hard to say fun when you're talking about working with Francine's story, but just as far as the collaboration and trying to get a really important story out in the world, it was fun working with her on that so that she could go up there and be fully herself while telling this very difficult, tragic story that's not just her tragedy. This is part of what her story was about, but like a tragedy that in some ways belongs to our whole country.
Hello, I'm here during the lunch rush with Janice, who owns her own food truck.
Best cheesesteaks in town.
Janice traded up to Geico Commercial Auto Insurance for her food truck business. We're here where she needs us most.
They sure are.
We make it so easy for her to save, with customised coverage that grows with her business. Sorry, I just get so emotional talking about saving folks money.
Not this onion I'm chopping?
It's just so beautiful. Oh yeah, no, it's the onion.
Get a commercial auto insurance quote today at geico.com and see how much you could save. It feels good to Geico.
So
I'm sorry if it was too dark. You can always put it down.
that wasn't too dark. That wasn't too dark. And as we're talking, it's, I've read, and I don't know how to say it as eloquently as I've read it, but that, our saddest emotions, and when we have, such sadness or what we would, that might be expressed in crying, is in a very similar way to laughter. And so it's very interesting that as I'm thinking about the darkness of her story and then bringing people to laughter, and the same that I saw in that congregation with my mom's eulogy, just the tears streaming, but then those tears become like tears of laughter, like right in a split second. And it's just so interesting how we can shift so much with that, and it's
true.
And I think some of it is, yes, the storytelling and the art of being able to do that. But then also as the individual, kind of like we were saying earlier with my friend Christina, is, speaking about my mom, that I would come in just in tears about it, but then being able to see that glimmer of what was either humorous or life-giving in these things. And so I think some of it is on maybe the storyteller to help communicate that, but also just us in our own lives looking for those little glimmers in what might otherwise feel like darkness.
Absolutely. And, I might have said this earlier, but people sometimes will say, what are your favorite stories? The funny ones or the darker ones? And honestly, both, because often the best stories have both.
Right.
Often the darkest stories that have some of the brightest, funniest moments, because that's how life is.
So when we're kind of in that conversation of the art of crafting a story, having our start and having our finish really tightened up, knowing that first starting line or two, knowing how you're going to end it, how you're going to wrap it up. So we've got those two tightened up. Third is really sharing that space with our listeners, the senses of how they can experience it with us. Emotion, not being afraid of sharing our emotions. And then what's our fifth kind of strategy to keep in mind as we're crafting our story?
You always want to keep in mind your stakes. And what I mean by stakes, the stakes is, what do you have to win or lose? Why do you care about what happens in the story? Because if you can convince us that you care, and probably if you're telling a story about it, you do care, then we're just going to automatically care too. We are a very empathetic species. So it's like, if it's about something that you're trying to get, what happens if you get it? What happens if you don't? Communicating that is really important. And sometimes there's layers of stakes, like that it could be that you're auditioning for something that's really fun, that you really want to get because of your identity. But then maybe there's a deeper thing that audition connects you into memories of your aunt who recently passed away. Like there could be and that the best stories do have those layers of stakes. But just thinking about it, when you're thinking about your story, just think about, what is it that you like? Is there a decision you need to make? Is that like part of your story? Well, then what happens with either decision, or what happens if you just don't make a decision? Because one of the things we talk about in the book is that a non-decision is actually a decision, because something will happen. So it's about finding the tension in that.
And maybe asking our audience to either weigh in with their own decisions or what they would do in that situation, or to kind of understand either why it matters or positioning it to them of how do they feel about this. Yeah.
Exactly.
We had the silliest social media post a couple of months ago. So I do a weekly segment on our ABC affiliate WGNO here, and we do it with the morning meteorologist, and there had been a gap where the normal meteorologist had left and they were hiring a new person. So the nighttime guy, Hank, who I've done these segments with off and on over 15 years. So we know each other super well, but he's not usually on the mornings anymore. So he was filling in. And so it was such a treat, because Hank actually, when I first started this podcast in 2019, I wanted someone to help walk me through almost introducing myself, because I felt I'd never done a podcast before. I was really nervous. And my husband said, Hank? I said, yes, because he's super skilled in guiding that conversation, and he knows me, and he can add the humor and all of these things. But our kind of way that we interact with each other is always, can we get the other to like do something or say something that just makes us like cry laughing? And so it's like, live TV, and we're always trying to like slip something in there, like of how can we get the other one to like, break. And so for social, though, it was right before we're going on air. And I had a floral shirt, and it was a tight flowery print, and I had just gotten it at the outlet mall, and it was my first, I'd gotten it on Saturday, and here it is Tuesday, I've got it on. And I turned to him, and we don't even realize that the cameras are rolling for our person who's doing our social content. I turn to him and I say, hey, do you like my shirt? And without missing a beat, he says, how old are you? And then it's this whole thing, this whole shtick that I say 49. That's what I thought. It's the floral print, and he starts going down this whole thing, and I'm dying laughing. And then I like it helps, and I say, it's from Ann Taylor, this is the outlet. And then he's just going on about, this is about the age where you sit on your porch and your floral prints, and I'm crying. We posted it. What was the funniest thing was, and this isn't really stakes of what we're talking about in a story, but it was one of the few times that I felt like all these people were weighing in on the shirt. And so it wasn't stakes as much as it was, but it was like they were either coming to my defense if they didn't know him, and who does this guy think he is? Or they were weighing in, I like the shirt. I would wear the shirt. I think you should wear the shirt, but it was so funny to actually something so silly. And it also, I think, also kind of shows where we are, that like sometimes just light is what we need. But it was so many comments. People would stop me that didn't maybe comment on social and would still weigh in on the shirt.
It's so funny. But they sold a lot of those shirts afterwards.
I haven't worn it since. I'm like, oh, when I wear this. But it's funny that something either can have a greater magnitude or something that's just so silly, but it's getting people to like just think about something and maybe have an opinion. Maybe that's not the best idea of stakes when we're talking about it, but it was the stirring up something in people that they were all weighing in.
People had felt like they had a stake in your shirt. Seriously.
Or protecting me. Like, yes, it was hilarious. So our tightening up our beginning, tightening up our close, knowing those, really having those almost like memorized, even if we don't have the whole story memorized, so that we kind of have a clean start, a clean finish, guiding people through the space, not being fearful of showing the emotion. And then finally, the stakes. Why does this matter to ourselves? Why should it matter to them? Even if it's something as silly as like a floral print. And so thinking that when we're telling a story or we have information that we're communicating, and let's say there's like multiple layers of it, sometimes I get stuck. Like, do I start with what's the takeaway that I want to be sure someone hears, because it can be tempting to like lead up to get interest, and you start with like planting a seed and then you build and build and build and then boom, you finish with a big ending. But then there's the risk of you've lost their attention by that point.
Generally, people always want to walk up at the Moth and say, this is a story about how my horse ran away and I found him. It's like, no, just start in. When I was 7 years old, I was gifted the most amazing horse, because you're more likely to catch people with that. There's something about the summation. Also, like, what if you summarize it not as well as you're going to tell the story? Like, people might say, well, that doesn't sound interesting, whereas they might be completely interested in the real story. So we generally suggest that people not do that.
So don't give away the ending.
No, do not give away the ending.
Lead in. And that's where it's really important to know, how are you starting it, so that you start with a clean, concise, bringing it together. And those few lines right in the beginning that are, again, you might be kind of memorizing it, but you've done it in a way that is, okay, this is going to catch someone's attention. It's going to help them, okay, like, hey, this sounds interesting, I want to hear more, but not giving away the ending. So leading into that big impact. I think probably the exception I'm thinking would be if I'm doing, let's say, an interview, a radio interview, and it's going to be a 20-second thing. I need to just get right to the info. And then if I have time to elaborate. But otherwise, if I've got limited time and I'm trying to communicate a message about something we've got going on. And I think that's sometimes where I've gone too far the other way. I want to tell why it matters and lead up. And then they're like, and we're out of time. Like, but I didn't get there yet.
But that's really different from telling a story.
Yeah.
Like, that sounds like you're more making an announcement that you're just trying to make fun. And so I think that has like that kind of has different rules. You have to just jump in with that and be like, boom, 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 because you only have 30 seconds.
Good point. I think before we even get into the art of storytelling, is this a story or is it an announcement? Because I think when someone is in there for that story, which is also when you're around the table at night, like or the dinner table, or you're on a long car ride with someone, like those are the times that people are settling in and it's story time, versus you're talking to maybe, someone who's a, executive in your company, and you've got to get straight to the point because you're going to lose them very quickly. So I think knowing your audience is the key there. A few other things, if we can run through the, in the book by you and the Moth team, How to Tell a Story, there's a section that is the perils of detail overload. And I felt like this was written for me. And this was the one that I kind of referenced earlier of, not getting too bogged into the details. And so some of the things that y'all include is too many specific dates.
Yes, dates can be a killer. And here's why. It's because somebody who hears a date thinks that they need to remember it. I actually taught a storytelling class last night, and one of the people in the class told a story where he listed the date. It opened with the date he got engaged, and that's great. Of course, he should totally open. That's totally fine. Of course, you're going to remember that date. But then he had a date where then she changed her mind and broke off the engagement. Then there was another date, and I was just like, lose all the dates. You can have the very first one, maybe, but then the rest of it, because people think that they have to remember it. So if you're listing off a lot of dates, people are like trying to keep it straight in their head. And then they're going to miss the extremely important things that you're saying that don't have anything to do with the date. So, I mean, generally, I would just say like a few weeks later or a month later versus saying, October 1st and November 3rd.
The same thing with too many names.
Yes. The second you say a name, people think that character, this person in your story, is important, and that they need to remember it. And so one of the tips is, where possible, say, like, even like if I were telling a story, I might not even say Joshua to be my husband. I might just say my husband through the whole story. Can it be the doctor, the nurse, the mailman? Can you identify them in another way if they're not the main character? And then just let only one, maybe two people actually be named. Because again, it's like people subconsciously think they need to remember it. And then they're so busy trying to remember it that they're missing important details in your story.
And it's okay to merge occasions. And so and I think we talked about this briefly earlier, but it's okay to kind of summarize, and that if something did happen in multiple stages, kind of the same thing as the dates, it's too much detail. And so just sort of smoothing it into one so that people aren't categorizing. When I do hear certain things, I do categorize it or think I need to remember, or I find myself thinking, how did that person remember that date? How do they know?
Yes.
And I'm like, and then I'm kind of thinking, would I have remembered, and then I'm not listening fully because I'm thinking about like that's so much. And then the details, I think sometimes there's, and I'm totally this, that we go too many details that don't matter. So how do you know what's enough to share? The story I just told with Hank and the shirt, I tried to keep it brief. There was more,
Good.
but
Yes.
how do we know, like the floral shirt that I'm proud of that I just got, those are, but then I guess, how do you know, like when you're telling a story, what's too much in details? What are just some examples for someone to
An
dial it back?
example- Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think your story could have had even more details. Not that I thought you told it totally beautifully, but like you could show me like the color of the flowers, or like given how important the shirt became, you could. I think if anything, you could have had more. So I think you were perfectly fine there. But sometimes when people tell a story, like an example, that Jen Hickson, who I worked with forever at the Moth, and who was one of my co-authors, will say is like if you're sometimes what she likes to say is sometimes you can just take the cake out of the oven. And what she means is someone could be telling a story and they're like, I decided to bake a cake for my mother's birthday. So I took out the flour and I took out the sugar and I took out the baking soda and I took out the da. And then I took the bowl out and I set it on the counter. Now, there could be a story where every step of this baking the cake might matter because maybe you skipped a critical ingredient. Like there could be a real reason why you want to name all of that, but chances are you don't need that. You can just say, I decided to bake a cake. It came out of the oven, I frosted it, and off I went. Or you could just arrive at the party with the cake, depending on how relevant to the story the cake is. And so there are times when we want details, but if it's too bogged down, like another example would be like if you're talking about taking a car ride to the grocery store. Now, if something happens on that ride that's critical to the story, you might want to talk us through the ride, but otherwise you don't need to be like, I drove down Elm Street, then I turned left on McDougal, then I turned right into, just say, I jumped in the car and pulled up at the grocery store. And we've all been stuck next to that person at the party that wants to say, I got in the car, I took out my keys, I put the keys in the ignition, I turned and so think about whether or not the details are important to the audience's understanding of the story. Because also you want some detail, right? But it's just if you try to put in every detail, then the ones that are the most important won't pop out because it just becomes too much for people to remember.
Travel stories are that way too. Travel, things that go wrong with travel. And, that's something you hear and you think, how quickly can this story be done? Because everybody's had these travel stories, but when someone's telling it, it's as if it's the first, and then the details of what happened or like, a flight change or whatever. So yeah, I guess thinking about, is this novel? Is it something new or different or unusual from the norm? Or is it relevant to the rest of the story? The questioning details in your own story. I think this is a big one that, we'll hear or other people who are close to them, they'll say, well, Aunt Marge, it wasn't Marge, it was Mary. And well, no, it was Marge. And then it's the back and forth on, or was it Tuesday or was it week before last or last week? It doesn't matter is what you're saying.
Absolutely not. Yeah. And look, memory is a very tricky thing. It is so tricky. And I misremember things. And my husband is very literal. And so every now and then, it hasn't happened in a while, but every now and then I'll be telling a story and he'll be like, that did not happen in Georgia. That happened on our trip to California. And I'm like, what? I mean, that's probably a bad example because I don't know if I would mix up California and Georgia, but there'll be something where I completely got a detail wrong. And there's actually scientific studies that when you tell a story about what happened, your memory of what happened becomes not what happened, but your telling of the story, if you're following me. So when you tell stories over and over and over, you tend to drop out anything that you're not including in the story. So so that's kind of a funny thing. So if you somehow just misremember at one moment and tell it over and over that way, you might accidentally, that's a way where suddenly you could be telling something that's not true, but without meaning to, which is maybe a slightly different point from the one you were making.
No, I think you're right. People can, a friend of mine is going through something and it's personal. And so she shared with me what the actual was, but she's just shared with other people something different. And because it's personal. Not everyone needs to know this. And I've supported, that part of the story. And then someone asked, hey, how's whatever it was, what the story that she's kind of putting out to the public. And then she kind of turned to me and said, I'm going to start believing this own story of mine, because she's trying to just keep it neutral, kind of keep it hands off. But she even kind of jokingly said, I'm going to start believing this. Some of the other things as far as kind of practicing it is standing up when you practice. I also kind of envision where I'm going to be or trying to put myself in that space. And it could be at a table, it could be in front of an audience, like on a stage. And then the other note you have in here is like, pay attention to like where you lose your place. And and then maybe give yourself, another, either rearrange the structure, or is there something in there that maybe the flow needs to be restructured there?
Totally. Because if you keep losing your place in the same place, then it probably means that there's something in the story that's just is not naturally flowing in your head. And sometimes just by rearranging something just a slight bit, it becomes easy to remember again. So yeah, so that just can be like it's not a red flag, but it's just like sometimes there's a reason you keep leaving something out. I'll have this with a storyteller where it's rare for someone to genuinely leave out the biggest beats of their story. But if somebody is, there's always something up with it.
Okay. Yeah.
I need to help them figure out. Like maybe there's something that wasn't quite true in the way they originally told it. But there's usually a reason why they keep leaving that thing out. And so sometimes in my case, I'll just rearrange the story so they don't even need to say it.
And then all of this is to say, just try it. We've talked about the art of crafting a story, and these are just some of the strategies just to think through, and not that each of these is going to matter to you. A lot of them you're going to be doing already, but just kind of thinking through if any of those are like, I haven't really been making the most of that element. This is just kind of to think through some of those. I don't think that we've talked about yet the science of the benefits of storytelling. You talked to me about the MRI with telling a story and kind of the patterns in our brain.
Yeah, they've found that when you put someone through, like when somebody tells a story and you put them in an MRI machine, this is a Princeton study, and they tell the story as they're going through the MRI. And then you put another person through the MRI, and they're with headphones listening to the recording of the story. Their brains sync up and light up in all the same places at the same point in the story. So when you're telling a story, we talk about how it connects us. It literally connects our brain waves to each other. And that's why listening is such a beautiful art form. If you can truly listen to somebody, you're connecting your brain to theirs. And that is such a gift in this world where people just rush around so busy and don't have time to like stop. So think about that. Next time you're listening to somebody, even if it's like maybe an older person and they're going on and on, just remember that you are giving them a gift with your listening.
I think that's probably also why when we hear a story, sometimes we feel our stomach flip or we get the goosebumps. We feel the tingle because we are truly listening. And we're hearing, there will be things I say, and when I might share something, I'll feel myself get goosebumps, and the person I'm talking to says, "Oh my gosh, I have goosebumps," because they've been truly listening, and our brains are sending these same messages.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we've all been in the room where someone's telling a story, and the cliche, you can hear a pin drop, where just the room becomes completely silent. Because someone's telling a story so intensely and so beautifully. And it's just one of my favorite things in the world is when that happens. Yeah, every now and then there would be a story at the Moth where there's some huge twist. um, and there's one Moth story. It's like, I guess it's sort of a spoiler, but it's for the context of this, it's okay. Where this guy, it's like a story. There's this long, long build up where he's in this bar. He sees this guy, every Friday night, and he's always hoping that he'll pick him up, and he never does. And years later, the guy's not even living in the city anymore. And he sees on the news that the guy who he was hoping would bring him home is being arrested, and it's Ted Bundy. Yeah. And so I got to where when I knew when he was going to tell the story, I was in the room. I was so lucky twice for him to tell it. If I could, I would get up out of my seat and go sit in the back and just wait for it. It was so really, and we had to also train him to really stop and let the audience have a moment to collectively have a heart attack and then catch up. Yeah, there's like another story where a guy working at a bank ends up taking $10,000 out of the bank. Maybe it's $50,000, and he goes and he gambles the whole thing away over his lunch break. And that I also, if I could, would get up and go sit in the back and just watch the audience as he's losing. It's just like but yeah, it's so fun how we're just connected, like even physically. I mean, I saw a play last year that was so intense that at one point, me and my friend who I'd gone with, we were literally clutching each other. But I think that is one of what art can do for us. It really can bring us together emotionally, and it's so important and healthy.
You said something that reminded me of some advice I got from somebody that was completely unexpected. We had, for our first book, we had a launch party, and it's our Eat Fit cookbook, and I'm sure you're familiar with James Carville, and so
Yeah.
James and his wife Mary had generously offered their home to be the site of this launch party, and so it's this
Cool.
beautiful home in uptown New Orleans. It was packed. There were so many people there, and I'd never had something to this level. And we knew that we were going to have a full house. We knew we were going to have, the whole shebang on here. And so I had my notes and thanking everyone of what this is going to be. And I had two people I adore who also we work closely with. One is the owner of Commander's Palace, one of our oldest, like most beautiful restaurants here in New Orleans. The other is a woman who owns a company that we feature their product a lot through the book. And they're just really strong, fun women. And so they were kind of, my hype crew, and they were welcoming everyone first and then kind of sharing a little bit of their anecdotes and then turning it to me. So that also helped kind of with the nerves, but I was paralyzed with fear. I was really, really nervous because again, my nature is not to stand up in front of a crowd and speak. It's sort of like a necessary evil for me to do with the career choice that we have. So I had all my notes, I'd written it, and I kind of had talked about it. And I was talking about the growth of Eat Fit and that, starting with the seed of an idea and this what if, and what if we did this, and here's how it grew. And, we started with 2 restaurants and then 6 and then 12, and then kind of walked everyone through because a lot of people in the room knew this and a lot didn't. They just saw this program that's sort of blowing and going. And so I wanted to take that opportunity to kind of share the genesis of this and then also the evolution of it, kind of the passion that had been behind it. And I stood in their empty home because we were there preparing for the party earlier in the day. We brought all our clothes to change into there, but everyone, had left for a time. And I'm standing, they had this beautiful, when you walk in the door, again, this old New Orleans uptown home, you walk in, it's sort of this big giant foyer, and they had a big curved staircase kind of on the back end of it. And so we were standing on the landing. We knew we were going to stand there. And so I'm standing there by myself, no one's around, and I'm practicing this. And they were so nice. They were helping, to have their house just in like top shape for this event. And they had a painter who was their regular house painter, had been there touching things up. So he has on his white painter shirt, helm paint and his white painter's pants. And he's passing through the room and he stops in front of me. And I just wait. And I'm like, oh, I'm just practicing because I'm thinking, please go, because I'm so nervous. I just wanted to talk to an empty room. He said, go ahead. And I said, okay. So I did it. So I go through, and it was, 8 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it was. And he stands there the whole time and just listens. And then I finished and he said, can I give you some feedback? I said, sure. he said, well, and part of it, there was some really impactful parts. Like you said earlier, I forgot one of the biggest points. A chef who had really inspired us to do this cookbook, Chef Carl, had been our official chef ambassador for Eat Fit. He had been someone that we worked with just super closely. He had been the chef at Commander's Palace, just tied in with the community. Everyone loved him. And he had passed away the day we got the proof copy of the book in. He passed away. So he never got to see this book that he had brought to life with us. And so I'm telling all of this, and I'm telling that part, and so when he says, "Can I give you some feedback?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "You have so much good content in here." He was like, "But you're rushing through it." He said, "I needed time to process it. So if you could leave after you say the pivotal events, leave some space for us to hear it and digest it." And I thought, wow. It was Edgar the painter giving this guidance. And so that night when we had all the crowd there, like I remembered like the painter's words of advice. And so I think that's something too. It goes back to what we said in the very beginning of realizing that your story matters and not thinking that you're inconveniencing people.
It's so true. And that's really important. We talk about that in the book, that to vary your tempo. Like you can use your voice. This is some advanced storytelling, but you can use your voice almost like a zoom lens on a camera by just literally slowing your words down. When you slow down your words in a very specific way, what you're indicating to the audience is that what I'm saying right now matters. Then you get to the in-between parts and you can just bounce through, you speed up the voice, you're taking us through. But then when you get to another point that you really want to make sure they remember, you can slow your voice down again. And also taking pauses in between. Like my friend Josh used to say to me, "Put a period at the end of your sentences, CB. Put a period at the end of them." Because I would just be like, talking in strings when I was nervous. Having the courage to put the period at the end of your sentence. I mean, one of the things is pauses in a story are like paragraphs on the page. Like they sort of indicate that like this is one thought, and now we're going to start a new topic a little bit. So I've came up with that recently, and I find that as a helpful way to think that when you pause, you're showing the audience that now maybe we're going to just like slightly switch, the topic, or like those words all went together, and now these words are going to go together.
And it gives them time to process if there was emotion that's coming through in that, like in some of these things that I was sharing. For him, he was like, it's too much to process too quickly. You're moving on. I needed time to sit with that for a minute and then move on. And I felt like, well, let me just hurry through this because everyone's politely standing here. But wait a minute, let me just slow it down and let it have that they're here for this. They chose to come here. And so it's not an inconvenience. It's that opportunity to like really share this message with them. Any last things that we would share with our listeners that might be, taking, whether it's connecting with those in their lives, inspiring others to bring out a better or healthier aspect of themselves that maybe they've been struggling, like anything that is taking that story and recognizing it and bringing it to life, guidance for people.
Well, the last thing I always say to my storytellers before they go out on stage, and I do the same thing, whether it's a dental hygienist who's never been on stage before or Lin-Manuel Miranda, is I remind them to have fun on stage. And like your stage might be a table at lunch. So I don't mean it has to be a literal stage, but if you're actually bothering to tell a story to someone, no matter what the context, remember to have fun. Because usually there's a reason why you're telling that story in that moment. And so just like letting yourself lighten up a little bit. I also say that don't worry too much about nerves, because nerves show you care. Like if you're a little bit nervous, like I so feel you standing on that stairway waiting to go on, but nerves really do show you care. Like I am always nervous before I speak. And I always would say, like, the second I'm not nervous before I'm speaking, then someone else should get my job because it means I don't care anymore. So do remember that. But then if you are actually on stage or like in a group or even like speaking to a table, a dinner where there might be important people in the room, just the more you can have fun and enjoy relaying that to them, the easier it's going to be for them to take in what you're saying.
No, I love that. So really just we're kind of breaking it down, the art and the the art of crafting the story, the science of storytelling, and these are things to consider that can really help us tighten things up and take our story and have it be even more listenable, if that's not really a word. But ultimately, what matters is that we're telling that story and that we're comfortable telling that story, that we're connecting with others, that we're having fun doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it really just moves me, how much we can be connected through our stories, even on social media,
Yeah.
people, it gets a bad rap and I understand why. But I do, like, if something crazy happens to me, I do look forward to going on and sharing it where I can, because it can take something that might otherwise be annoying and help you process it and help it, feel funny to you. I mean, so much of my son's, when he was a child, I don't do it anymore because I feel like he's 14 and his stories are his own now. But he would do something that maybe in the time would seem like a problem. And if I could find a way to go and have a sense of humor and write about it, where like his aunts and his uncles and my grandparents could see it, it would really help me process it and take me into a place of like, joy and appreciation of the moment. So like that can be, that's another, I mean, that's more of a written story, but it's still telling a story.
You had said that especially the people who don't think they have the story to tell often have the biggest stories. And the evening after you first told me that, and I was sharing with some people that I was going to be interviewing you for this podcast, one of the women that was there said, I feel like, Molly, you're always telling like funny things happen. And I don't think that I have a story. I don't really have stories like that. I was like, let me tell you what Catherine says. She's like, and then I told her and she kind of laughed and I thought, I bet she does have some stories in there and she's holding them in. So over time we may peel away and get to those, but everyone has a story. And I thought it was interesting that her perception of herself was, I don't have stories.
A lot of people think that, in my class last night, one of the people in class showed up and with all the prompts and stuff I'd sent them, he still felt like he didn't have a story. And I tried to give him some more prompts before, but then by the time we got to him, he told a story that brought down the house. And we're like, what? We'll get into it, but it involved like, Brandy backstage at a Beyonce concert. I was like, oh my God, you were holding that in? You
Right.
showed up tonight, you don't have a story? But yeah, I always make an example of my dad, like who really does not think of himself as a storyteller. And honestly, I had not thought of him as a storyteller either. But one of the delights of my life is he just got remarried at 83. Now he's 85, but at the time, to my stepmother, Sue, and she brings out something in him that is so delightful. And so suddenly all these stories I've never heard are coming out of him. And it's just been the absolute best.
I love it. I love it. So anyone listening, if you've been enjoying the stories and such that we're sharing, start thinking about what do you have? And if you think that you don't, the answer is you do. And you may have the better story than any of us. And Catherine, I'm going to put your Instagram and I'll put your LinkedIn so people can see you or reach out to you there if they want to know more. And you have such a different variety of ways that you are supporting people or organizations in storytelling. And so for our listeners, as you're hearing this, if you want to know more, you will have those ways to connect with Catherine there. And then also the book, I'll link to the book that Catherine and the Moth team have. There's several different books that are story collections by the Moth. The book that I've been referencing that we're talking about that's sort of more the guide is the How to Tell a Story by Catherine and the Moth team. And I highly recommend it. It's one that you don't have to read it all cover to cover. You can flip through and you can, I go back to certain sections over and over that really kind of call me. And then depending on where you are kind of in your storytelling journey, there may be parts of it that you can kind of go in and kind of like hone in on those spots. So,
Absolutely. And I do not get a cut of the book, so this is not me trying to sell anything. But if you do buy the book, I'll say two things. One is the Kindle version is often on sale. It'll like pop up for $1.99. So watch that if you're a Kindle reader. The other thing is if you're going to buy it, buy the paperback. Maybe the publisher's going to kill me. But what I'm so proud of is there's just 16 extra pages of supplemental information. Like if you want to have storytelling at your book club, or like there's more prompts. There's writing prompts. We really wanted, as soon as when a paperback comes out, the publisher, I love this, will encourage you to add in extra things for that. And we really worked hard on it. So there's an extra 16 pages in the paperback edition.
One more thing to tell us about the box with the questions that are prompt questions. I think this makes a great holiday gift.
It totally does. So at one point, our publisher came to us and said, do you want to make up a storytelling game? And we were so delighted by this. And so we came up with this little game. It's called The Moth Presents a Game of Story. It comes in the most gorgeous little green box with a gold moth on the cover. It's so pretty. We were blown away with the designer. Shout out to them. And in it it's like cards. They're all storytelling prompts that came from years and years of open mic story slams and questions that we'd put out to our audience to encourage them to tell their own stories. And there are rules to the game. They made us go with rules, but we were not game makers. We're like, what? We sent everybody home to test it out over like Thanksgiving with their families. But you don't even have to follow the rules. I mean, what's nice is you could just have the game, pull it out at dinner, like pick a card randomly, and maybe everyone goes around the dinner table and answers the same question at the top. It's just a really fun way to get people talking and to get people talking in a deeper way. It's also great for journal prompts. Like if you don't know what you might want to write about, just pull out and type and answer the question yourself. But they're really beautiful. I now bring them to people's houses when I go to a dinner party. It's like, instead of having 2 bottles of wine, I bring a bottle of wine and the little storytelling box. But yeah, you can usually get them. You can get them usually on any sort of most bookstore sites sell them.
It's all of this is rethinking, retraining our brains if needed, so that we don't just go to what's easy consumption, whether it's TV, whether it's social media. Like there's things that are just easy consumption to be passive about. I think everything that we've talked about on this episode has been, it's being active. It's actively thinking through our thoughts, our experiences, how to best share it. And in this case, it's also actively asking these questions and then actively listening for that relationship and that connection. I can't thank you enough for your time. This has been just so much fun. I love it. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, I've loved it too. Thank you so much. And you have such a great podcast. I've been binge listening to it. So I'm having such a good time. So thank you for all of the beauty you put out into the world.
That is like, wow, I can't even believe you just told me that. Wow. I'm so excited to hear that. Thank you. Coming from you, that's just such a good, that's just beautiful to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, it's such an honor to be a part of it.
So much fun spending this time with Catherine. I am truly grateful for her to carve out that time, spend this time sharing her experiences, her expertise, and really just her wisdom, and helping us to start to release maybe some of these fears that we have on sharing these stories, or realizing that these stories matter, and really taking that time and, thinking through maybe things we haven't shared before, what would be worth sharing. And some people say nobody cares. I think after hearing this, I hope you realize that's not the case. And as you share your story, why it matters, it can matter to have that impact on other people, whether it's just getting a good laugh or understanding you better. And one of the biggest values, as I said just right at the beginning, is releasing what we might be holding. And as Catherine said so eloquently in our interview, as we share our stories, it can almost help us change the past. We're not changing the facts of what happened. We're not changing the incidents, but we can change and really have a better sense of control over how we feel about it, how we remember it, what those feelings are that it's evoking in us. So telling that story really matters. So again, tremendous thank you to Catherine. I'll include the links that we talked about in the show notes of this episode. Let us know what you think. If this has influenced you, if you start sharing things in a way that maybe you hadn't before, if you've got that story you want to share, we always want to hear about it. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. And if you'd like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next time for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.